Recording in progress.
Okay, folks. Apologies, first of all. You know, the CSE interviews are also going on these days, so I'm involved in that part of the phase as well. So, how many of you watched the budget today? Oh, good. Now, so what were the major developments? Any idea? Okay, how many of you are from economics background? Okay, all right. I can see some of the faces which I used to see on online sessions. Now, let me just start with what we are going to do. So the idea for this particular class and the next class is basically to unravel the budget for you. Now, why this is important is that budget is not only useful for your UPSC prep, because I see a lot of people who are also going to prepare for other exams. So for UPSC primarily, if you see questions after 2015, you will not see a direct question from budget. Before 2015, yes, there used to be certain questions on the budget, but after 2015, there's no direct question. For example, earlier they used to ask you questions on fiscal deficit, revenue deficit. So these questions are no longer asked. The questions that are there are much more technical in nature, and if not just technical, it's also it's mainly on the nuances of budget. For example, this year there are a number of schemes in which alterations have been done. So people say that questions have not been asked from the budget, but they don't read all these schemes and the implication of these schemes. For example, in this year's budget, they have talked about PM Shri scheme. Any idea what this scheme is about? PM Shri? School. So PMs had introduced last year around 15,000 schools, and in a different kind of a format. Now, whether this is a centrally sponsored scheme or is it only a center scheme? These are kind of questions that can come in prelims. But also in mains, the importance of budget is there along with the economic survey. Now, this year, there's no economic survey till now, but there is already a document that I'll show to you, which is a review of the Indian economy, which is published by the Department of Economic Affairs. Now, that becomes an important document for your prelims this year, if you're appearing for prelims this year. But also for, say, economics optional, mains, all that other areas, this is important. Then coming to the next part, when the final budget will be presented this year in July, the full year's budget will be presented, simultaneously the economic survey will be there. That will be much more relevant for your mains prep rather than because it will be anyways after your prelims. So these are few aspects that you need to be careful that why you should read the budget this year prelims and mains. But also if you see the mains, have you gone through the tenures? So there was a question last year which was a direct question from the budget, was talking about differentiating between capital receipts and revenue receipts. So our capital side of the budget with the revenue side of the budget. And not just that, why this is also important is at times we ask fundamental questions from people about the finances of the country. Like for the last 1 month, I've been taking interviews for people who are appearing for the CSE interviews, and even the best of them are not able to answer simple questions like fiscal deficit, revenue deficit. Like even today when I interviewed 4 candidates, I asked all 4 of them very simple questions on budget. And they should definitely be aware of that. I didn't ask them numbers. Numbers I can understand that you can get confused. But definition, simple definition, what is primary deficit, what is revenue deficit, you should know as an economic student preparing for the examination. So we are going to talk about budget in 2 ways. One is called as the structural part of the budget, the structure of the budget, which I call as the anatomy of the budget. Budget के numbers change हो सकते हैं, but the anatomy will not change. The anatomy that you have versus another individual is going to be the same. So the structure is going to be the same, but just the numbers will change over years and the schemes will change. So what you're going to study today is going to be relevant till the time that you are an economic student, till the time you are preparing for any kind of examination. That will be valid. All you need to do from next year onwards is that change these numbers. See the orientation of the government is changing. I'll give you an example. It was the kind of budget that the structure of the budget has been there for the last 50 years. 50 years ago also the budget was same. The structure was the same. It's just that in last 3-4 years, if you see the orientation of the government, it has become much more capital expenditure oriented. So that kind of methodology has come. Now, so we'll try to unravel all these things, and finally we'll talk about what this year's budget talk about. How is it different from previous year? Why the government could not launch a lot of schemes? Because see, the budget is going to be for the upcoming year, for the upcoming financial year. We are going to talk about that as well. And because the moment that financial year will start, something will also start. What is that? Question from political science or polity. From 1st of April, there's another thing that will start. The model code of conduct. Elections are going to come. Before the election, the model code of conduct comes. And if you read the model code of conduct, especially the model code of conduct, the section 3 and section 4 are heavily focused on the party which is in power, the responsibilities that it has, and things that it cannot do because of the Election Commission of India. So it becomes also, it is not just an economic document, folks. It is also a political document. It is also a social document. It reflects the philosophy of the entire country. If you compare the budgets of NDA, it is more capital oriented, infrastructure oriented. Yes, it has human element. But if you compare it to the UPA era, it was the government which started, NREGA, the livelihood missions. Those days, it was the social sector which was taking precedence, or revenue expenditures which were taking precedence over capital expenditure. Now the roles have kind of reversed. So this is the philosophy of the budget that you need to understand. So let's first try to understand what the budget document is, what are the different kinds of budget, what are the different kind of numbers that are presented, and then understand the philosophy. So this entire exercise that we'll do today and tomorrow is going to be in multiple parts. First, as I said, we'll understand the anatomy, the structure, then we will see the numbers of the budget, and then we will see the philosophy of the budget. And in the end, I will also link that 78-page or 72-page document, you can call it as the new economic survey of two chapters. So we'll also talk about that, so that from our point of view, you don't need to do anything except for the small handout that we give. And next Sunday, we'll have a small exam, which will be on MCQs based on budget, and we'll test whether you have actually prepared the budget well or not. And a couple of mains questions, which will also be from the budget, but I want to see that how well you can hit the right point. So in 8, 9 minutes, 10 minutes, can you hit the essence of that answer or not? So this is what we are going to do. Let me start with a small introduction of sorts. Now, most of you, how many of you know me from before? There's some students from the university. Okay. So my name is Siddharth. I teach in Delhi University. I've been teaching for the last 10 years. And apart from Delhi University, I also teach at LBSNAA. What does LBSNAA do? क्या करता है? नहीं, क्या करता है? क्या होता है वहाँ? कुछ नहीं होता है. सिर्फ शादी होती है. और कुछ नहीं होता है. Okay. So if you think they study, they don't study at all. Okay. So, and you can see that in their eyes. If I have a morning session, I know it will only last 15 minutes. So, and also the graveyard session, which is just after lunch. So, वहाँ training सिर्फ खर्चा हो रहा है आपके ऊपर. उसके अलावा there is nothing that happens. Apart from that, I also teach at an institute called at IIPA, where I teach the senior bureaucrats. So once you are going to become joint secretaries in your career, there is a 10-month course that happens at Indian Institute of Public Administration right at ITU. So I teach senior bureaucrats, and that is a much more tougher class for me. So I can easily manage, what is that? I've been teaching for 10 years. I can easily manage a newly minted IAS officer. But when I'm taking a session, which is where the joint secretary of finance is sitting, and he has a career experience of an IAS for 20 years, I know I have to be watchful of what I'm going to say, because I have a theoretical experience, he has a practical experience of finance. So that I consider as to be a much more tougher experience. And with respect to my background, I have a master's in economics from Delhi School of Economics, if you've heard of it. I have a master's and PGDM in artificial intelligence from University of Texas, and I'm also done law, which basically means that I've studied because I was also a UPSC aspirant. So once you become a UPSC aspirant and you are unsuccessful at it, I was unsuccessful at mains for 5 times, and I had there used to be a time when there used to be 2 optionals. दो optional होता था एक पहले. So I had this favorite hobby of changing optionals. So my first attempt I had economics and geography, so my geography became good. My second attempt I had economics and public administration, my public administration was good. Then third attempt I had economics and philosophy, so philosophy was good. Then I happened to fail in Hindi in one of my mains where your papers don't get corrected. And in my last attempt, and now I can see the irony, I took coaching for ethics, and that was the last attempt, and I got 51 out of 215 in that coaching attempt. So this was my interesting journey with civil services. But then life comes back if you really want something. And I still remember when I was an aspirant way back in 2008, 2009, I had written the latitudes and longitudes of LBSNAA on my desk, because geography was the second optional. So, and ultimately life would leave if you really like something, and if you really pray for it, and if you are really enthusiastic about it. I think life puts you in that circle. So that's a bit of history. Let's start our session, but before starting our session, let's see what are the headwinds to the Indian economy, because in what context are we going to understand budget? Because this has been is anyone going for interview this time? No interview candidate? Okay. So what is the issue here is, because we keep asking a lot of aspirants that in what context are we making the budget? So you should know that what are the problems that the economy is facing. Anyways, I'll teach you the budget. But in what context is this budget being made? Are you in a good situation? Are you in a bad situation? We need to understand that. Now, any idea what's the GDP growth rate for this year? 7.3%, which is the advanced estimates. We'll come to the fact that what are advanced estimates. Now, we are growing at 7.3%, which is world's fastest major economy, which tags us to be world's fastest major economy. But at the same point of time, you have to see the growth rate of other countries. Yes, we are 7. We would always like to be somewhere around 9, where China was growing for 9-10% for 20-30 years straight. We want to achieve that. But you have to see in context of the world. The world is growing by 2%. You are growing by 7%. There's a huge difference between that. So in terms of the quality growth, when the world is doing poor, if the world is growing at 4%, I can understand that 7% is not that good. But think of a cricket match. Everyone is getting out in single digits. And even if you score something like a 40 or a 50, that's a huge change. That quality, that is the quality innings. You see that people who score, who does Australian, do you follow cricket? The Australian team really appreciates the people or cricketers who come and score in Australia. Anyone can do well in their own country. Indian batsmen, you create flat pitches like in Pakistan, and hit the bowlers right, left, and center. But if you go there and then play and make good runs, that is what Australians love. So when we see a caliber of a player, we see that whether he can bat in South Africa, he can bat in England, and he can bat in Australia. If you can do well in these 3 countries, you're a good batsman. This is how we treat. Similarly, when the world is doing poorly, if you can grow at 7%, that's a spectacular growth rate that you have. Now, the quality of that, and this is, by the way, that I'm quoting from that Indian Economic Review, the document that has been released by the Ministry of Finance. So that itself says that the quality of growth rate that we are having of 7% is much better than an 8% growth rate if the world was growing at 4%. So this is in context with that. But what are the problems that we have? Yes, we are growing fast, But let's see some of the problems that you should be aware of. Yes, we are growing fast, but see, when you talk about what is GDP, first of all, as an economics student, you should know that GDP is the demand side of the economy. What is the supply side called? GVA. Gross value added is the supply side of the economy. The demand side of the economy is the GDP of the economy. Okay. When we say GDP, how big is India's GDP? Any idea? India का GDP कितना है? It's around $3.7 trillion. Okay. Now, I'll explain this thing in numbers as well, by the way, because when you will read the budget, you will not find things in dollars. Today I'll show you the budget numbers. You will find things in lakh crores, and I want you to remodify that lakh crore, because I can't understand lakh crores. What is 1 lakh crore? So I want you to internalize that. How many zeros are there in a lakh? 5. How many zeros in a crore? So and if you multiply this, 10 to the power 12, which is 1 trillion. So whenever you see 1 lakh crore, it is nothing but 1 trillion rupees. So don't get confused in these numbers of lakhs and crores. You will confuse yourself even more. So I'm going to unravel all of that in pure number terms that you can easily understand. Now, when we say that someone mentioned that we are growing at 7.4%, that's a good growth rate. But our GDP comes from 4 areas: consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net exports. This is C plus I plus G plus NX. This is a kind of a macroeconomic identity. Have all of you heard about this? C plus I plus G plus NX. This is a basic macroeconomic identity. Now, traditionally, India's GDP has been consumption driven. That, think of an airplane. A typical normal airplane has 2 engines. If we talk about a normal 747, so it has 2 engines. In case of India's economy, the engine of consumption is basically burning 70%, is giving thrust of 70% to this growth rate, and only 30% is coming from investment. When I say consumption as 70%, I mean private consumption as 60% and government consumption, government expenditure at 10%. So overall, if you see India's in aerodynamic terms, India's plane is being fueled by one of its engine, which is consumption, which is powering 70% of its GDP, and 30% is investment. Only 1% plus minus is net exports. It's heavily tilted towards consumption. If you compare it to China, China is different. In case of China, it's an investment driven economy as compared to a consumption driven economy. But what is happening, and which is worrying aspect in India, is that this consumption engine is slowing down. This consumption engine is powering only 4.4% growth rate, where the GDP is growing at 7.7. Your consumption, which is powering 70% of your growth, is only increasing at 7.7. That's one problematic area in the context of which the budget is being made. And this can also be seen if you're reading newspapers. This can also be seen. Do you follow the Indian Express or the Hindu? I am more of an Express person. So if you see, number of articles have come by Ashok Gulati, number of articles have been there in editorial. The problem is that real wages in NDA 2, especially real wages. When I say real wage, I mean purchasing power of the wage. It does not matter how much money I get. It also matters that what is the price level. If I increase your pocket money by 1,000 rupees, but everything that you are going to buy increases, the prices increase 2 times, your effective real purchasing power reduces. So what has happened is real wages, in fact, in 2023, 22, 23, they have gone down. So the poor man in the economy is not able to afford things. Now my question to you is, how can we, and this is one question that I asked in LBSNAA also, because this part of the slide is also from LBSNAA. Because this is practical economics, this is not theoretical economics. How, as a student of economics, if I tell you that I want to see what factors will show to me that rural consumption is going down? How can I see that in market? Wage is not increasing, but how will it be shown in data? GST, someone has pointed out GST. Who pays GST? Someone from the business community. GST as a number is going to tell you how business community is doing well. You have to understand these things now. Yesterday, the data came out that we had second highest GST number ever recorded, 1.7 trillion rupees, which shows that business is doing well. But I am saying there is stress in rural economy. People do not have income to buy stuff. How can you figure that out in the rural market? Exactly, tractor sales. If the tractor sales are not good, I can say that people are not able to afford tractors. Another very basic thing which comes from HUL data, if you think, Hindustan Lever, what does it supply? FMCG goods, soap, and it has all category of soaps. Best kind of soap, Dove. Worst kind of soap, 555 Tikkiya. We are not interested in Dove, and they say that the market for Doves and upper segment is doing well, but the market of rural stuff is not doing well, which shows you what? That there is stress in the rural areas. This is what the interview board wants you to answer. This is what the mains wants you to answer. This might not be a pure prelims aspect, but this is the kind of reflection with which you have to read your newspaper to understand what is happening in economics. Then, another thing. So this was one problem, consumption plummeting. The other is rural stress, which is again related to this. And it is because of the fact that yield in India is going down. It's already 1%. If you see, there are a lot of agriculture questions in this thing as well, in prelims as well. If you see our yield, it's 1% of that of an average American. It's 1/3 of that of China. So Indian farming is no longer viable. And 60%, 70%, 65% of our population lives in rural area, is dependent on agriculture. 45 is directly employed in agriculture, and we are saying that the rural area is in stress, which is also reflected in a number. Can you say, how can I also say that the rural area is in stress? I'll give you a hint. It's related to NREGA. Can you understand, if NREGA demand is increasing, if NREGA demand is increasing, then what is the issue? It is basically unskilled work that is happening in the rural areas. And why will I go for a minimum wage when there is no alternative available? That shows you stress in rural area. This is the kind of insight you should understand. I'll give you another example which is not mentioned here. PLFS data. More women, the government is saying, I'll show you the government's budget figures today itself. The government is saying that the female labor force participation rate has increased. That from out of 100 women in the age group of 15 to 59, only 22 were willing to work or working in 2017, and now 38 are willing to work or are working. That is in fact a stress in the rural area, that females have to come out of house and work in unorganized sector, informal sector, because there is not enough income in the household. This is the insight that you should be able to get from the PLFS survey, not the numbers. The numbers can be said any which ways. For example, today itself I asked someone in the interview that what was the Acer report number, and he was mentioning things like that the number of students who are enrolled have increased, female participation has increased, tertiary level females have gone to 38%, but the crux of the matter is, what is the learning outcome? If 40% of the students that are passing are not able to do, and I'm talking about students from the age group of 14 to 18 who are not able to do class second stuff. That shows that learning outcomes are poor. This is what the interview board is going to ask you. This is what mains is going to ask you. A critical analysis. Another area where I was poor in my first 2 attempts in writing mains. I was not able to comprehend the requirement of the question. The question is asking you, where do you live? And you are giving a full biodata of whatever you know about yourself. This is what the problem is. Within 2 seconds, you can tell, and with 10 years of experience, I can send within 2 seconds, I can see whether the student knows the answer or he or she is going to beat around the bush. So hitting the right answer, and if you know the right answer, you can write it in 8 minutes. It will need a lot of practice. But this kind of insight you would need. And this is also seen, so when I say rural stress, it is also seen in climate, because of climate change, it is also seen in water stress, it is also seen in input costs, fertilizer costs. Even day before yesterday, the government changed its nutrient-based policy. Are you aware of that? Earlier only urea was under control. Now all the fertilizer are under control now. This shows that there is stress in the economy, and it is in this context that the budget is being presented. Then the next third problem that the country is facing right now is that of debt and deficits. We'll talk a whole deal about what fiscal deficit is. Just don't go into the numbers that what fiscal, I'll explain it to you and you'll remember throughout your life. After this, never in your life will you forget what these deficits are. That's my promise out of this class. But what you should understand is that debt to GDP ratio is very high right now. We are indebted country, but it's still manageable. But the problem is, suppose I have 100 rupees to spend. I'll show it to you in this year's budget. If I have 100 rupees to spend, and out of that 17 rupees I have to pay as EMI. If I am earning 100 rupees and my EMI is say 20 rupees, basically my hands are tied in terms of development expenditure. And that's just not just 20 rupees. I'll show you it's much more than that. So if you are borrowing more, you have to pay more interest on that as well. And that is something which is a committed expenditure. The government cannot say that I am going to wash away my hand. The government cannot be a willful defaulter. So therefore, the government's hands are always tied because it has taken so many loans. So in that context, interest payment is a huge amount, and that is again something that we need to see, and we'll talk about this fiscal deficit in the last. Then last 2 issues that we are facing right now is investment spirits. Now the government has been gaga for the last 3-4 years that humne capital expenditure, which is called as capex, that we have increased our capex. We have increased our capex to 3.3% of the GDP, 10 trillion rupees we have invested. But the problem is that it is the government which is funding this growth rate. It is not, remember, consumption is not there. It is the government which is putting all its money, but the private sector till now has not put in much money. Keynes used to call it unleashing the animal spirit. There's this term you will hear, you will see in newspapers in the coming few days now. That after this session, again, something that you will be able to do is you will be able to understand what is written in the article. That what is the article is talking about. So a lot of this is the government tries to invest so that the private sector takes a cue and says, I will also invest. So the government is investing in something like rails, railway lines, airports, inland highways. So why is the government doing? Government is creating this massive infrastructure so that the private sector can come up and set up its industries, its shops, this industrial corridors it can do. But the private sector cannot build highways unless it's in a PPP mode. So therefore the government is taking that first initiative of investing. In economics, people from economics background can relate it to the unplanned growth theory, or there is something called balanced growth and unbalanced growth theory. So this is an example of an unbalanced growth theory where the government is taking that first step, and then the private sector will do it. But the problem is the private sector is not living up to that expectation, and it has gone for something called as, you might have heard about this in the previous year's newspaper, greedflation. There's a word called greedflation. So instead of when the COVID kind of reduced, instead of reducing the prices, what these companies did was they kept their prices high and their margins increased. So the inflation was there in the economy because of the fact that all these companies were greedy. Let's make profit out of it. Let's not reduce the prices. The moment there was COVID, they said we are going to increase the prices, but when the COVID was over, they did not reduce the prices. So their profitability has increased, but that has not reflected in their investments. And even if they are investing, it is highly concentrated by a few entities in few areas, only in airports, only in roadways. But other areas, private investment has not come up. And the third problem is, which you will understand when I will teach you that particular document that I told you, that economic survey kind of thing that has released, that chapter 1. That also says that there is a huge pressure on the government to go for this carbon transition. If you've been following the COPs, as a student, you will start following these COPs, Conference of Parties of UNFCCC. So in that context, again, there is now a lot of pressure by the world that also developing countries should also start to take role in this. So therefore, how do we go about this low carbon emission path without sacrificing our GDP? That's going to be a huge problem for us. So this again you will see in this year's budget. So once you read, and I'm going to talk about the last issue, once you read these 5 issues, you will understand in what background has the budget been introduced and whether the budget does justice with these problems or not. And final thing was inflation. Any idea how much inflation are we facing these days? What is the inflation rate? How do we see inflation? In India, what is retail inflation? It's calculated through an index called as Consumer Price Index, CPI combined. Now, we have a target in our country which is set by the Monetary Policy Committee, which is between 2% and 6%. So we need to manage it around this median value of 4%. Right now, in the month of December, the data came in January. It's a lagged data that comes on every 12th of the month. So on the 12th of January, when the data came out, it was 5.7%, which is in the range of 2% to 6%. But the problem is, if you dig deeper into the inflation number, you will see that the food inflation is around 9.5%, 9.7%, which shows that the poor man is hurting. And there is no, I cannot understate the achievement of this particular government, that it has been able to hyphenate between economic performance and electoral performance. No other government in the history of India has been able to separate these two things. आज तक कोई ऐसी गवर्नमेंट नहीं आई जिसने इकोनॉमिक्स को पॉलिटिक्स से अलग कर दिया. Any other government with a 9% inflation is a suicide. But this government will come with a resounding victory even in May, because it is able to separate this economic issues with all other issues. That's the political side of it. So we are another problem that we are seeing in inflation is that we don't know how much inflation will be there. There is a concept called as core inflation and normal inflation. Core inflation is basically when you take out food and fuel out of inflation, because these are not in our hands. Food because it is dependent on rainfalls, and fuel because it is mostly in the hand of OPEC, and we import 85% of our crude. But the problem here is both of these things are not in our hand again. The impact of El Nino, if you have not heard of it, you will hear about it in your geography classes, that there is something that happens on the Peruvian coast which has a direct impact on the Indian monsoons, and thereby the impact on inflation in India. The other thing is the geopolitical risks that are emanating throughout the world. First, it was COVID, then it was the Russia-Ukraine war, then it was the Israel-Hamas issue, now it is the Houthis attack on the Red Sea lines of trade, lines of communication. So because of all of this, the strategic area of Red Sea, where majority of world trade happens, is now under threat. Most of the oil also transits through that particular area, and the shipping costs are also increasing. So because of that, the entire geopolitical situation is problematic. And now you have issues whether China is capable of attacking Taiwan, which again is world's major producer of semiconductor chips. So in all of this tension that is there, you really can't say that what will happen to inflation in the coming few months. Now, apart from that, as I told you, there are three areas of inflation: roti, chini, and dal. Pulses inflation, right? The sugar inflation, and the cereal inflation. When I say roti, I mean cereal. This is from a article in the Indian Express. And then it's impacting the real purchasing power. So this is the background in which the budget is being presented. I have given you all the problems that we are facing right now, all the major problems that we are facing. So let's now understood the problem, major problem. I can tell you 20 more problems. I can start with education. I can start with healthcare. I can give you 20 more problems. But these are problems which are more contemporary and which can be solved. Education can be solved only in 10 years. You can't do education. You can't change education in one budget. You can't make policies for that. Similarly for healthcare. But these are issues which we are facing right now, and we need to address these issues. Now let's start with our issues with respect to budget. Now I'm going to get into some basics first. Now since how many of you are absolutely new to civil services prep? Completely new to civil services prep? 2 people. Okay. Now so this is something that I've taken from polity. Now when we talk about these financial accounts, there are actually 3 accounts that matter in India. One is called as the Consolidated Fund of India. Now this is the main account which is given under Article 266 of the Constitution, which talks about that all the revenues that you are going to see in the budget, you're going to see a lot of taxes being imposed, you're going to see a lot of expenditures being done. This is what budget is: raising money and spending money. Whether it's from tax, whether it's from non-tax, that does not matter, but we are going to raise money and we are going to spend money. Most of that, in fact, the budget itself is about the Consolidated Fund of India. Because when we are talking about raising money, when we are talking about spending money, we are talking about taking money out of this fund. And when we are talking about depositing money or raising money through tax or non-tax, we are basically talking about putting money into this account. So think of it as your main account, think of it as your lifeline for running the economy. This is called as the Consolidated Fund of India. It's going to be very important when you will study the chapter of Parliament in Lakshmikant. In that chapter, you have this entire part of budget and budget process. That is extremely important for your prelims as well. Then the second article that we have again is a subsection of 266, which is Public Account of India. Now, what is this public account and how is it different from the Consolidated Fund of India? The public account is where, now suppose if I have money and I deposit that in the bank, what will the bank do? It will give me interest over it. I am the holder and bank is the one who is liable. It's on my assets and it is a bank's liability that it has borrowed from me if I'm depositing money there. And then the bank can pay, the bank can spend that money in any which ways that it wants, but essentially it's basically liability and it's going to give me some rate of interest on it. Similarly, the government of India can also borrow from the public. For example, PPF accounts. Some of your parents might have a PPF account or a GPF account or a national savings certificate through which your parents might save taxes up to 1.5 lakhs. So that is basically payments in the nature of banking which the government of India is accepting. So the government is acting as a banker to me. It is going to pay me a very good rate of interest. It is going to be absolutely risk-free because the government cannot fail. Your bank might fail, but your money in your post office, the money that you have invested in these certificates, national savings certificates, is almost as gold-like. And you're going to get 7%, 8% rate of interest. That too, up to 1.5 lakhs, it's tax-free. So this is how the government raises its money. But one important thing here is, if you can see the parliament picture here, the control of the consolidated fund of India is with parliament. And you will read it in polity. Not a single rupee out of this fund can be taken out, and not a single rupee can be deposited in this account without the authorization of the parliament. The parliament is the authority over consolidated fund of India, but when it comes to the public account of India, it is the finance minister who's having the authority. This is something which could be a prelim centric thing, that under whose instance is this money being held. The executive can spend that money as and when they like, and in any matter that they like. There is no restriction on it, if the money is collected under the public account of India. But another one is basically your contingency fund of India, which is to make any unforeseen expenditures, and there are around 500 crore rupees kept in it, and it is held by the President of India. But it's not a major account, but these are three economic accounts. These are three financial accounts that you, as a student of economics, as a student of civil services prep, you should be aware about. Then let's talk about the timeline of the budget, and I've drawn here with an analogy with one of my favorite sports, which is F1. Now, this is again going to be a review of polity. So with this slide, you can revise at least 3-4 pages of your polity, not just of the budget part, but also the part of general bills. Any idea what is the process of a passing of a bill? What happens first? What is the first thing that happens? Reading of the budget. There's no discussion at first. First it's called reading of the budget, introduction, reading of the budget. Then you go for a first reading, then you go for a second reading. You can make some amendments there. Then it passes on, then you pass certain provisions of a particular bill. A bill is not passed in wholesale. You can debate on each particular section of a bill, make amendments in the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha, and then once those amendments are done, then as a whole the entire bill is then voted upon. Then it transits into the second house. Depending on the nature of this bill, what is the power of the second house? Suppose it's Rajya Sabha. Then what is the power of Rajya Sabha to amend it or to change it? And then once it is passed by the Rajya Sabha, then what happens? So how many parts are there in the parliament? How many organs? This is again a UPSC question. Yeah. Three. It is the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha and the President. President is a part of the parliament, because without his assent, and that's the trick question that UPSC had asked, that it is also a part. But still, even if it is passed, doesn't mean it is operatable. Why? Even if it's passed, it doesn't mean it's operatable. It has to be published in the Gazette of India to have been notified. It's the same thing with all the 3 criminal laws. Passed has become an act, but until unless the government of India notifies that these are the provisions that we are notifying, only then it becomes as the implementable law of the land. And that's why if you would have read, there was a conference of DGPs in Rajasthan, where all the DGPs of different states were there, and the discussion on the implementation of these criminal laws. Then, so similarly, you have the passing of this budget, and here you might get some technical questions. Now, when the budget is presented on the 1st of February, you will see, I'll show you the website of the Government of India. You have the budget speech, you have budget documents. There are a number of documents that are there. But for us, the most important document is budget at a glance and key features of the budget. That's only. We don't want to get into all of this. As a student of economics, as a student of economics in this exam, we are only concerned with budget at a glance. And there's another document that I'll show it to you. This document is called as key features of the budget. These are the only 2 documents that we are interested in. Once the budget speech is there is no debate, folks. Today there was no debate on the budget. The Honorable Finance Minister introduced the budget, he wrapped it up in 1 hour, and that's okay, bye-bye. After that, and that's also the case with a normal bill, by the way, because it goes with a similar analogy. After that, what happens is that there is a general discussion that happens. Now, in this general discussion, the discussion happens in both houses for 3-4 days, but again, there is no voting. So the treasury bench will say that, oh, अब की बार बहुत बहुत बढ़िया कर दिया मोदी सरकार ने, ठीक है? And you will have new slogans coming up. And the opposition will say, no, it is anti-poor, सूट बूट की सरकार, ये सारा rhetorics आएंगे. तो ये सारा जो होता है ड्रामा वो इन 3-4 दिन में होगा. But there is no voting here. And that also happens in case of a normal bill as well. There is general discussion on each particular bill without it being put to vote. Then what can happen, not can happen, what happens in case of the budget, the annual financial statement, is that it is put to departmental committees. You would also, can you give me an analogy in case of parliament that what could happen to a bill? If it's a technical bill, so वो कुछ technical bill है और वो इंट्रोड्यूस हुआ है, तो अगर पार्लियामेंट को लग रहा है कि कुछ चेंज करना है, मेजर चेंजेस करना है, व्हाट कैन इट डू? It can send it to a departmental committee for expert comments or a joint parliamentary committee as well. That okay, all of us will, some of us will technical minds, and you can have lawyers there, you can have public policy people there, you can have economists there, and then make certain changes to that particular bill. So, but in general, in case of an annual financial statement, you have scrutiny by these departmental committees, which will the House will be adjourned for 3 to 4 weeks, and these committees, I think there are around 24 departmental committees, and there is something called demand for grants. I'll explain you what demand for grants are. Let me tell you what demand for grants is. Now, each particular ministry, each particular department in government of India would have asked for certain money. ठीक है, हर कोई अपना कुछ ना कुछ पैसे मांगेगा. अब what we need to do is, what these departmental committees will do is, it will scrutinize that the money that has been asked by these committees, these departments, is it justified or is not justified. So all of that discussion happens in the scrutiny of departmental committees, and that is called as demand for grants. It is something like, how many of you still take pocket money? Pocket money. बाकी सारे सेल्फ सस्टेनिंग कर रहे हो, पॉकेट मनी सारे ले रहे हो. नाउ सपोज आप इस बार घर जाते हो एंड यू से दैट इंक्रीज माय पॉकेट मनी बाय 10,000 rupees. Suppose you are in a good mood and you say that increase my pocket money, you have enough guts to say this. Two things will happen. Either you will get a chappal, if you have parents like mine, or if you have put a reasonable amount, and your parents feel that, oh, is preparing for civil services, or you have cleared your mains, the parents will see, oh, commissioner banne wala hai. Let's make a round table conference of all the members and let's put it to vote whether this money should be given or not. So that demand that you have done is called as demand for grant. Grant is there is a difference between a grant and a loan. I hope you don't get a loan from your parents. Some parents do give loans to their children. I know a lot of my Baniya friends where students have taken loans from parents. But in normal families in India, you don't get a loan, you get a grant, because loan you need to give back. A grant you don't need to give back. So these grants that you have asked, this committee is going to scrutinize it for 3 to 4 weeks. And then what happens is, now comes the interesting part, that there is nothing called, if you see the Constitution of India, the word, there is no word called budget there. The word under Article 112 says annual financial statement, and there is no bill called as the budget bill. Instead, there are two bills that are presented in the parliament. One is called as the appropriation bill and the other is called as the finance bill. The appropriation bill is basically how will you spend the money. If I want to spend X amount of rupees, how will I spend it is what is the appropriation bill. So appropriation bill is basically all these ministries and departments creating this list that I want this much money for the next financial year. This money should be given to me. So your demand that you are wanting, that demand for grant that you have done is basically nothing but a appropriation bill. So your proposal that you have given to your parents is nothing but an appropriation bill that you have presented to your parents, that please allow me this increase in my pocket money. It's an appropriation. And the opposite side, if there is an expenditure side, there has to be an income side. The opposite side is basically the finance bill. How will you fund it? You have to have income to give it to someone. So the funding part of the Consolidated Fund of India, how is the money raised, is the finance bill. So you have the voting for demand for grants. You have this demand which is voted upon, and once it's voted upon, it becomes a grant. So you will see in the next month or so, you will see in Parliament, the speaker will says all in favor ayes, all in favor nays, and he will immediately say ayes in favor, and he will pass that particular grant. So you will see all of this happening over the next 1 month. And this can only be done in case of a money bill. It can only be done in Lok Sabha and not in Rajya Sabha. Rajya Sabha, in case of money bills, has only recommendatory powers. It doesn't have any, it is not an equal house. But it is a part of what is called as financial bills. In polity, you will see finance bills, financial bills. There are 3 kinds. There is a money bill which has the highest power. Then you have financial bill type 1 and there is financial bill type 2. So you should know the difference between these 3 types as well, as a student of polity. Then there can be cut motions that can be done. Policy cut. Policy cut is like that chappal that you were getting. You asked for 10,000 rupees, 1 rupee was thrown back at you, and it's actually 1 rupee. Irrespective of how much money that you have asked, if a policy cut has passed, the government will say, ye le beta 1 rupaya. But my question to you is, can that actually happen? Can a policy cut be introduced? Or can, for that matter, any cut be introduced in the Parliament? Because it will lead to censure of the government, and if the opposition have sufficient amount of numbers, the next thing that will happen is a no confidence motion being introduced. So these are only fashion things that we have fashionable terms that we have introduced in the Constitution. They have no effective power, no statutory power at all. So these are the 3 kinds of cuts. Then there's an economic cut where you can reduce the money by X and X amount, and then you have a token cut where you can reduce the entire amount. So instead of giving you 10,000 rupees, they will give you 9,900 rupees. They'll reduce 100 rupees out of whatever amount that you have asked for. This is called as voting for demand for grants. Then you have the next part, which is passing of the appropriation bill. Now, appropriation bill, as I told you, is nothing but taking out money. Now, my question to you is, why should it be passed before 31st of March? Because remember, we are going to talk about this. The budget that came this year is for 2024-25, which will start on 1st of April 2024. The government will have to spend some money on 1st of April 2024. If the appropriation bill is not passed, if it is not allowed by the Parliament, then how will it going to spend the money? So therefore, this bill has to be passed by 31st of March. But suppose for any reason, like in this case, in this year it was an interim budget. In this case, the ministry, suppose it has asked for 1200 crore rupees, it will not get 1200 crore rupees. Why? Suppose a ministry has asked for 1200 crore rupees for the entire year. It is not going to get 1200 crore rupees. What if the government changes? It will be the prerogative of the new government to make the budget. In that case, there is an element in there's this part of the Constitution under Article 116 which is called as vote on account. which says that whatever money that the government may have, any ministry would have asked for, give them 1/6 of that money, because 1/6 stands for 2 months. All right, it is 2 months of money. So if a particular ministry has asked for 1200 crore rupees, which is equivalent to 100 crore rupees every month, give him 200 crore rupees. In terms of interim budget, or if budget has not been passed by 31st of March. In both cases. Because you need authorization of the, remember that term that I told you? You cannot take even 1 rupee out of the consolidated fund of India without the approval of the parliament. When you say approval of the parliament, it means passing of the appropriation act, bill becoming an act. And finally, you have the finance bill, which talks about the financing part of the consolidated fund of India, and here the amendment is possible because the finance bill is now being introduced into the parliament. Here there was a lot of debate on this stage as well and this stage as well, but the money side, the income side is talked about for the first time, and this is where the government plays a lot, by the way. Now, have you heard the controversy about Aadhaar bill? Has anyone heard about the controversy about Aadhaar bill? What was that controversy? Now what? See, I told you that in case of money bills, Lok Sabha has a huge power as compared to Rajya Sabha. Now, whenever the government thinks that something cannot be passed in the Rajya Sabha because it might not have sufficient partners, coalition partners, to support it, in case of Aadhaar, what it did was it made Aadhaar as a money bill, because the prerogative of declaring something as a money bill is with the Speaker of the House, which is unchallenged, but which was challenged later in the Supreme Court. So in this case, the government conveniently turned a normal bill into a money bill and passed it in the Lok Sabha and declared it to be an act, because the Rajya Sabha did not have any powers there. Similarly, at times, a lot of stuff is done in the finance bill. For example, the powers of a lot of regulatory bodies last year and last to last year were taken away. The powers of TRI, the powers of a lot of these self-regulatory bodies that are there were all taken away by the finance bill. Through one bill, they said all the powers of these regulatory bodies will come down, and they started finishing off these regulatory bodies, which has an impact on governance of the country. So again, something that you should be careful while reading the finance bill, that a number of things are done there, but it must pass by 15th of April. Now let's get into reading the budget documents, because this is where, as an aspirant, you should be able to know what are these terms. This is something that it's one of my favorite questions for UPSC interviews, that I keep asking them, what is this? And economics, there are two areas where I feel that students run away, and students are actually weak. One is economics, the physics of social sciences, because people think that they can read these 500, 200, 300 pages given by these famous teachers and they will become an economist. But that is not the case, because economics, if you see there, it's very logical. If you are able to connect the philosophy of the subject, then you can write it. Maybe prelims you can mug a lot of schemes and then clear. But if you see the marks of toppers in paper number 3, even in paper number 3 they are scoring less. If you've seen the marks last year, everyone was scoring around 80-85 marks, because they were not able to answer, and economics is a major portion, around 125 marks are from economics. They're not able to come to the concise point of what the economics answers are. You can't write schemes there. If a question is an analytical question, you can't just keep writing schemes and some data there, which you have been reading. And unfortunately, not the right kind of books are available in market for economics. There's nothing called something like Lakshmikant that is there for polity. There's no such book for economics. Perhaps one book comes closer, I would suggest, by reading it, but you need some kind of you need some kind of depth that you should have before reading it. One is Gaurav Agarwal's book. He's a 2013 batch IAS topper, and the other is Uma Kapila, the thinner one. I think these two books do sufficient amount of justice as a GS paper, not as an economics optional. As an economics optional, you need to do much more. But in terms of understanding the philosophy of the subject, I think these two texts should be good enough. But let me warn you, you will not be able to understand this text unless your fundas are there. If your fundas of what inflation is, what GDP is, what GB is, what agriculture is, what industry is, if those fundas are not there, then you will not be able to understand this book. So first, clear up your fundas, and then you can transit to this particular book. Now, let's talk about, and by the way, I think the maximum failure rate in LBSNAA is in economics. So, you have to pass. It's not the end of your examination, by the way. Once you get there, there is another challenge. There is another challenge because you need your rank in your cadre will also depend on the marks that you are getting in LBSNAA. And if you fail in a particular subject, you would have to repeat that particular course in the next FC and come back to LBSNAA for that particular, to clear that particular course. And like in case of my one of my sister-in-laws, she got rank 9, and from 9 she went to rank 51. So UPSC she's got rank 9, but because she did not study, she found my brother in LBSNAA, and both of them did not study. My brother did not care because he's from the Indian Foreign Service. He didn't care about that. So their marks are not added. So her rank moved from rank 9 to rank 51, and she was the last person in the UP cadre to become a DM. So that is where things get changed in your services as well. So these marks also matter, and economics is one area where there are maximum failures. So let's talk about this year. Let's first talk about this year. Now, the budget came today. It was an interim budget which was presented here on the 1st. Now when you will see, when I'll show you the budget document. Oh, can I show you the budget document? I think I can. Can you see this budget at a glance? This is this year's budget, the budget that has been introduced this year. Can you see this budget estimate? There's a term called budget estimate, revised estimate, and actuals. Every year when the budget is presented, you are talking about 3 financial years. This is very critical. You're talking about 3 financial years, and most of the students don't understand this concept. There's something called BE, RE, and actuals. Now, what is this budget estimate? It is something like, let me give you this analogy. How many of you are new to this examination? First time preparing, first attempt, it's going to be your first attempt. Okay. Now, when you start, before giving your mocks, you'll be very charged up. When you come for the start to prepare for the examination, you'll be very charged up. I will get rank 1. I will get 240 in my interview. I will get 150 in all my GS papers. I will get 350 in my optional. And in paper number 1 GS in prelims, I will get 150 marks. In paper 2, I will get 150. This is where your aim will start. When you start in January, February, this will be your aim. By the time it is October, November, you realize, oh, reflection, self-reflection. इसको कई बार हम कहते हैं कि औकात में थोड़ा सा आना. असली औकात बाद में आएगी. You will say, अरे मैं अकेला नहीं हूं. ये सोच सबकी थी. हर कोई रैंक 1 लेके सोच रहा है दिमाग. And then when the test, so when your first test goes and you do not fare well, यार कोई बात नहीं, मॉडरेट कर लेते हैं यार, 120 भी चल जाएगा प्रीलिम में. इधर 100 आ जाए, उधर 120 आ जाए, चल जाए. फिर आपका एक और आएगा प्रीलिम्स से 1-2 हफ्ता पहले. फिर आप भगवान सबकी पूजा करो कि भगवान सब कुछ ठीक है, 100 नंबर ही ले आओ पेपर 1 में, और पेपर 2 में .67 आ जाए. Because this year, I think only 80,000 students cleared paper number 2. And I know so many officers. So you can, by the way, you can get an exemption. Suppose you get into service this year. People who are giving interviews this year, they get into service. They don't get into their desired service. then they can be exempted from the training in LBSNAA only if you clear prelims. So the training starts in late August. The result of prelims comes before that time. Actually, these days, so in 20 days. So your result will come in somewhere mid-June. Only if you have cleared your prelims, you will be exempted out of your foundation course in LBSNAA. Otherwise, it's compulsory. I know so many officers who were forced to join LBSNAA's 98. This was the 98th FC. Who was forced to join the 98th FC because of the fact that they could not. They were in the service. They got into service, but they could not clear CSAT this time. And that's why LBSNAA was overburdened this year. Usually, I have taught 3 batches till now. Usually the batch strength in LBSNAA is around 410 officers, because most of the other people, the rest 500 are appearing again. Understand what I'm trying to tell you? Most of these 500 people are repeating again the examination. I have cleared the prelims. This time there were 650 OTs there. We call them officer trainees, because people were not able to clear prelims this year. So therefore, you will pray that I'll be very happy if I get 67 marks in my CSAT. Can I call this as revised estimate? Budget was something that you had initially planned, but revision, because of realizing the toughness of the exam, you have revised it to be something which is reasonable. But UPSC will show you the real face. What are you actually getting on the exam day is what matters. I have seen excellent candidates do really well and at times wilt under pressure and do poorly as well. And an average candidate on the day of the exam, he was able to maintain his composure and score well. I can give you one instance in my life. In 2013, this was the first time when the new pattern was introduced. I still remember the date of that day. It was 8th December 2013. It was the first time that new pattern came. All my examinations papers went really well. In fact, I might have the UPSC mark sheet as well. And my marks and Gaurav Agarwal's marks of all subjects, I think I had 1 or 2 marks more than him. Except for in paper number 1 of economics optional, I had a complete breakdown. Because I had not slept that day. Now you get 1 week gap between your GS and your optional. Those days it was a 1-day gap. Your GS gets over, 1-day gap and optional. And economics is a huge optional. Economics, physics, maths cannot be done in 1 day. Unless you've really, read it really nicely. And I did not sleep, and the first time in my life, I went blank in the exam. First half an hour, and that was the entire game. I got 177, and Gaurav Agarwal got 299. The difference of that I was not able to leap. So small instances like these that will change the destiny of your life. And all my friends, that was the year I thought that it was destined for me. All my friends, my entire circle got into IAS. No one got into even IFS. That was the year when economics, there were at least 8 toppers in the first 70-80. 8 to 10 people, because everyone else did well. So things like these, this is called as, why am I explaining you this is, there is one thing that you can plan, the other thing is revision, but what actually happens on the day of the exam is what matters, which is called as actuals. And this is why we need to understand this. This is for the upcoming financial year. What are you planning for the next financial year? We call this FY25. Don't get confused when you are reading the newspapers. You will get these terms now. People will not write 23, 24 or 24, 25. People will directly write FY25. Understand that. That means upcoming financial year. But just like this year, last year you made the budget. But don't you think now 10 months have elapsed in passing of that budget? And 10 months of that financial year has elapsed. You are sitting on 1st of Feb 2024. Your financial year started on 1st of April 2023. 10 months have gone now. can you make a revised assessment of what you have planned? Can you draw an analogy कि आपने सोचा था 150 but आप 100 पे आ गए? That is called as a revised estimate. You compare what you had planned in FY24 to what you have been, based on the 10-month analysis, what are you now projecting for the entire year? These might be two different numbers. Can you tell me an year in which these two would have been very, very different? Year in recent 5-6 years, COVID. Because no one on 1st of February 2020, Nirmala Sitharaman would not have thought that COVID will impact India. But the difference between what she had planned and what was the situation in 2021 was very stark. So there's a huge difference between what you had planned and what you are revisioning, and there's this third story, what has actually happened. Are you able to differentiate between these two terms now? This is for the current financial year. Always remember, the running financial year, which is already running. On 1st of Feb 2024, this financial year is already running. And then you have a financial year which has passed. Nirmala Sitharaman also made a budget on 1st of February 2022. Can you understand that? On 1st of February 2022, she made a budget for which year? 22-23. 23 financial year got over when? 31st of March of what? 23 it got over. समझ में आई? 2022 का जो बजट था वो था from 1st of April 2022 to 31st of March 2023. When will we get the first reflection of 2023? Right now, after that year is over. That is why we call them as actuals. So the budget document is always positively looking, reflecting on the current year, and also or re-estimating the current year, and also have a reflection of the previous financial year. So it's an exercise into 3 fiscal years. FY25 here, which is the upcoming year, FY24, which is the running year, and FY23, which is the year which is gone. And this is what the slide is also talking about. You have this revised estimates, you have this budget estimates, you have kind of a comparison, and then you have actuals. So actuals, the budget was presented on 1st of February 2023. It was for the financial year from April to March 23, and its revised estimates would have been presented in last year's budget. Can you see that? And now these are called as actuals, and this is the difference between budget and revised and budget. Is this clear? Any questions on this? Then let's see how are these numbers stacked. We need to, before understanding these numbers, how these numbers are stacked, we need to understand the structure of the budget. This is the portion which will remain constant till the point that you are a civil services aspirant or any competitive exam aspirant. This structure will not change. Only thing that will change is the numbers under this hood. So this is, let's see the budget, and let's see there are two sides of it. You have the receipt side, which is nothing but the income side, and you have the expenditure side. What was the expenditure side bill called as? Appropriation bill, and that was the finance bill. Now let's see the receipt side first. See, how does the money, how does the government earn its money? It earns its money from two sources. One is called as revenue receipts, the other is called as capital receipts. And if you see the question that was asked last year in mains, I think it was a 10 marker or 15 marker. It was a question that differentiate between the revenue budget of the government and the capital budget of the government. It's a different thing. Where a lot of students I know did a mistake was they divided into receipts and expenditure rather than just revenue and capital. I'll explain you why that a lot of students got poor marks in that particular, or were not able to pinpoint on the exact question. Now let's see receipt side. Now why is it divided into revenue and capital? See, recurring is one way in which, but exact thing, why is it called a revenue, is also because of the fact that there is no liability that is going to be created, no debt that is going to be created because of that money. If no debt is being created, no loan is being taken, you are not selling any assets. Your asset and liability. So in actual constitutional terms, I'm telling you, in constitutional terms, if there is no asset or liability change that is happening, then in that case it becomes a part of the revenue account. And if there is a change in government's asset and liability, it's a part of your capital account. But at times colloquially we also say that if it's a recurring income, you can put it in revenue. If it's a non-recurring, you can put it in capital. But that's more of a colloquial understanding of this. The exact definition is something else, and that's also given in the handout, which has not been given to you. So I'll ask someone to give you these handouts. So these handouts have the structure that we are going to talk about. Tomorrow we'll talk about the meat of this particular thing. Now let's go for a deeper dive into the revenue account. Now if you see the revenue account is further divided into tax and non-tax. Now tax I can further divide. Let's understand the tax side first. In the tax side, and I'll show you the exact budget document as well. If you see the tax side is further, I can further redivide into direct taxes and indirect taxes. Now the difference between direct tax and indirect tax is again something that will be asked in a number of board questions from tomorrow onwards. The interview board will start asking a lot of budget related questions, and these are these favorite questions: tax, non-tax, and the budgetary terms. So what is this direct tax and indirect tax? If the instance and the liability, if the person on which the tax is imposed, if the same person has to pay it, if the burden of tax cannot be shifted, in that case it becomes a direct tax. For example, my income tax, only I can pay, no one else than me can pay it. If I have a corporate company, only I can pay my own corporate tax. No one else can. I can't say my sister company to pay tax for me. So that is called as direct tax. And indirect tax, the burden can be shifted. Now, what do you think, folks? Is a direct tax better or an indirect tax better? Why? So suppose, let's say I am buying I'm eating at say Haldiram's, and Mukesh Ambani is sitting on the Haldiram. We are both paying the same tax on the dosa that we are going to have. But as a proportion of his income, that tax is nothing. As a proportion of my income, it might be a little. As a proportion of someone who is a daily wager, it's a huge amount. So what happens is that it becomes a regressive tax. So we need to wean away from indirect tax to a direct tax. And that has been the story of India as well. Earlier, the more underdeveloped you are, more will be your indirect tax share. The more developed you start to become, and that is again a nature, the structural change that happens in an economy. That the more developed you will become, the proportion of your direct taxes will increase. So these are direct taxes and indirect taxes, but within indirect taxes, I have written CGST. Why CGST only? Because the SGST will go to the state and the IGST will also go to the state depending on which state the consumption is happening. So that doesn't become the part of the consolidated fund of India. That's the problem. Therefore, this is there CGST. But I will give you another thing. When you will read your Lakshmikant and when you will read center-state financial relations, there is a huge section on financial relations. That's a very, very important part of your this thing. Plus, as part of paper number 3, as also part of paper number 2, you need to read some parts of the Punchi Commission report, which is the state center report. These are important documents. Why? Because they tell you the nature of relation, the fiscal relationship between the center and the state. And this is also related to, by the way, Finance Commission, which is a very important part of your curriculum. In fact, this year itself there was a question on Finance Commission in the prelims. Now, why is it important? Because this which the government is taking, this is what central government is taking. Not all of this will be kept by the central government. There is a body in the constitution called as Finance Commission under Article 218. It says that all of these taxes will be pooled in a pot. That pot is called as Article 270 of the Constitution. So think of it as a piggy bank. All these taxes, tax revenues coming into that piggy bank, and then from that piggy bank, the Finance Commission will tell the central government how much will go to the center and how much will go to the states, which is called as devolution formula of the Finance Commission. So if you see the 15th Finance Commission, it says that 41% of the shareable tax pool, this is called as shareable tax pool. The 41% of the shareable tax pool will go to the states. For example, if the sum total of this is 100 rupees, 41 rupees will go to states and the center will only have 59 rupees with itself. So the center is only interested in net revenue that I am getting, and I'll just show it to you right now. Can you see? Receipts, tax revenue, net to center. Can you see this term? Net to center. What does that mean? From all the revenues that it has calculated, I'll show it to you in a much more disaggregated way. See this. Can you see? This is called as gross tax revenue. You have collected money from all these sources. Then can you see? Less states share. So of this money, the Finance Commission says 41% will go to states. So the center will be left with center's net tax revenue. This is here, net tax revenue. This is the same figure that you will see in the previous page. So whatever the center is getting gets into Article 270. It's a pool, it's a piggy bank, Article 270. And of that 270, whatever money is there, 41% directly goes to the states under Finance Commission, which is called as vertical devolution. 41% to states, 59% to center. Clear? This point is clear? But there is a fraud that the center does. Have you heard of something called cess and surcharge? Swachh Bharat cess, education cess, fuel cess, surcharge the government imposes on higher incomes. GST compensation cess. Now what the government is clever about, there is an article 271 of the Constitution. So by the time you will read budget, by the time you are good with economics, there are a number of articles in the Constitution that you will be clear with. All the finance articles will be clear from Article 245 till Article 292. All of these deal with all these financial things. In fact, even trade and commerce is also in the same realm. So when you talk about this, the Article 271 says there is an exception to 270. If the central government is raising money through cess and surcharge, that doesn't become part of that piggy bank. It goes into 271 and 271 is directly taken up by the center. And this is what the center has been very smart about. It has been increasing cess and surcharges so that its own pocket is being filled and it does not have to share with the states. This is one of the major issues between state and center relations when you study the Punchi Commission report, or whenever you see the state-center relationship. This is one of the critical areas. पैसे में तो भाइयों में लड़ाई हो जाती है, फैमिली टूट जाती है। आप तो स्टेट सेंटर बात कर रहे हो, बीजेपी और ये कांग्रेस और आप, तो उसमें सोचो कितनी लड़ाई होती होगी। So this is what you should be able to appreciate. Then you have non-taxes. Taxes समझ में आया? Non-taxes, in non-taxes you have interest receipts. Now taxes is something that will be imposed on you. Then you have other business of the government where it will get some kind of revenue which is kind of recurring in nature, which will not create asset or liability, but you have interest receipts. Now when do you receive interest? When you have given a loan. Is giving a loan changing asset and liability? Is it increasing your asset or decreasing your asset? It is increasing your asset. If you give loan to someone, it is an asset for you. It's an asset for you. It's a liability for someone who's taken the loan. So if you're giving a loan, is it an expenditure or is it an income? Think of it. If you're giving a loan, is it an expenditure or is it an income? An expenditure. You have spent some money. Now, I'm trying to correlate this. I'll talk about that. The interesting question that you raised. But the moment that I give someone 5 lakhs, what will I show? I have spent 5 lakh rupees and it becomes my asset, 5 lakh rupees, because I'm going to earn something on it. So now tell me, within expenditure, within revenue and capital, what it should be? Capital expenditure, it is changing my asset and liability position. So you will see something like loans and advances. When I give someone 5 lakh rupees as loan to either to a center, either to some other country, I say $1 billion to say Bangladesh, which is called a line of credit at times. You might see these terms in newspapers now. Line of credit given to certain countries, which is borrowing ability. You give them that, okay, you have this line of credit. You will also see that in Shark Tank. In Shark Tank also, and especially if you follow the US one, they give lines of credit. The investor gives lines of credit. अच्छा इतने पैसे तक मेरे से ले लियो, but interest देखो मुझे उसके लिए. So you have these lines of credit. So this is loans and advances that you give to a foreign country or to a particular state. Say Punjab को loan दे दिया, हरियाणा को loan दे दिया. So money is being given, but when money is being given, in what intention? To earn some interest rate. That interest rate is not a tax. It's a recurring income that you are getting, and it is not changing your asset liability. It's basically your cash flow. That income is correlated here. So the money that you have paid here is generating interest receipts here. Are you able to correlate this? You are spending money to earn some interest rate. All right? Clear? Is the doubt clear? I'll tell you another thing. You are also going to get the principal amount one day. Don't you think you will get the principal amount one day? This is just the interest rate. What will happen? You will get a capital receipt. The person who had taken 5 lakh rupees from me first is going to pay me interest, and then one day is going to pay me that 5 lakh rupees altogether back. That is going to change my asset and liability position. My asset is going to get reduced, the asset that was created, and therefore it will come under capital receipts. I'll show it that to you. Now, let's see dividends and profits. Now, why is dividend profit as an income source? Because it's a variable income source, and this is a matter of a huge debate, especially with respect to RBI's dividend. And there was a committee that you should be aware about, a Bimal Jalan committee, which used to talk about how much. So RBI also earns money. How does RBI earn money? RBI buys bonds, sells bonds. It deals with forex operations, buying at lesser price, selling at higher price. It prints money as well. In that operation also it gets money. So as a government organization, it gets substantial amount of profit. But the owner of the bank is who? The Government of India. Similarly, the Government of India holds a number of companies in the name of the President. LIC, Maharatnas, all your Maharatnas, By the way, you should know all these Maharatnas, Navaratnas and Mini Ratnas. Mini Ratnas are of two types. These are things that are asked in prelims as well at times. So all these companies that are there, which are on in the name of the President of India, who holds the shares of these companies, anyone who's a shareholder is going to get some dividend, and therefore you will get dividend in the income part, because it's a non-tax. It's not a tax, because you are a shareholder in some part in a particular company. You're bound to get some dividends. Why profits? Because not everything is corporatized. For example, Government of India has an arm called as Antriksh, which is the commercial arm of ISRO. It's just like a private organization which earns profits. And because it earns profits, and it's a department of space, which is not a separate ministry of sorts, it will give profits to the Government of India. So you have dividends and profits. And then you have external grants. Now, what are these external grants? These are grants given by, say, World Bank, IMF, ADB, grants given by different philanthropic companies, philanthropic societies which are funding basic schemes of Government of India, like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So all of them, when they give money, remember, this is a grant. It is not a liability, because you don't have to pay it back. Had it been a loan, it would have come under capital, because it would have created a liability for you. Because it's a grant, you can keep it under non-tax revenue receipts. Is this part clear? I'll just show it to you in the budgetary terms. See, this is how this looks like. This is how it looks like: tax, revenue and non-tax. So this is what we call this as revenue receipts. We call this side as revenue receipts. But then you have capital receipts, in which the government actually changes its assets and liabilities. And the best way to understand capital receipts is through debt and non-debt making. Basically, if the government is getting money and it changes the asset liability position, because then only it will come under the capital account, the capital receipts, it is going to change asset liability. But if it creates a liability of a debt, then you call it as a debt making capital receipt. This is extremely important, because a lot of people get confused. 99% of everyone that have ever interviewed, and I've been interviewing for the last 2 years, 99% of them tell us that, in the interview board, tell us that the fiscal deficit is total revenue minus total expenditure. It's an incomplete definition. You have to exclude borrowings, or you can directly say that the borrowings of Government of India is the fiscal deficit of the government. So this, and how do you borrow? You can borrow from market, you can borrow from RBI, you can borrow from PSUs, you can borrow from outside India as well, external debt. But 95% of our debt is internal debt. This is also called as internal debt, and this is external debt. 95% of our debt is internal, only 5% is external. That's why we don't have that problem of sovereign debt problem. So this is market. These are all of this. The sum total of all of this is called as debt making capital receipts. Debt making capital receipts, which is nothing but fiscal deficit. But there are also non-debt making. Anything where asset liability is changing, but it is not creating a debt. That is disinvestment proceeds. You have your own company, you sell certain part of that company. Strategic sale, Air India. You sell your mobile, you sell your laptop. This is something like you have a space in your house and you are renting out some part. or you're selling some part. For example, I own the entire place and I'm selling, say I'm selling one floor of it. That is like a disinvestment. I am still the owner of the building, but I'm only sold one floor. That is kind of a disinvestment. But when I sell the entire building, it's called as a strategic sale. Understood the difference? Strategic sale versus disinvestment. The technical part is that the difference between a sale and a disinvestment is that who controls that corporate body. If the control is with the government of India, then it's not strategic sale. And in all likelihood, the government would like to have 51% control over any particular entity. Because what happens is that if you have 51% share in a particular company, you are the major shareholder. And if you are a major shareholder, without your explicit authorization, no major decision can be taken. Therefore, the government tries to keep the limitation to 51%. But even 26% right is sufficient enough for a lot of things. So therefore, that difference between privatization is one when the control is also given. When you say something is being privatized, that means government might be a 10% stakeholder, but the ownership of running the enterprise is with the private entity. That private entity will decide who will be the chairman of the company, who will be the MD of the company, what pricing we will do. Everything that private entity will do, government will just be a shareholder in that. That is called as privatization. In strategic sale, you completely sell out of and you go out of that business. Just like in case of your Air India, just like the case of that you should do with BSNL and MTNL, because they are bleeding, they are hemorrhaging the Indian economy. At times, opposite also happens. Private entity being bought up by government. A very comical thing happened in the telecom industry. Any idea what happened? Vodafone, because it was not able to pay some dues which were there for the government. So Vodafone had to pay some 30,000, 40,000 crore rupees to the government. It was not able to pay. The government said, transfer me the shares. So now, some portion, around 20-30% of a private entity, a private operator, is being owned by the government of India. So these things also happen at times. And then you have asset monetization. Now, the difference between strategic sale, disinvestment and asset monetization is that people have got smarter. Just like landlords in Rajendra Nagar. They say, why to sell the entire room or why to give the entire floor to someone? Let me partition even one room into two parts. Why leave the dining hall? You might have seen in Rajendra Nagar. Even the dining hall is being divided into two parts and sold as two rooms. So, or being rented as two rooms. So they have become experts in monetizing their asset. If there is a basement, people will not like to stay there, open a library. That's why you see so many libraries in basements in Rajendra Nagar. If there is a rooftop, convert it into some eating center, like in this case, in this building. So these guys have become incredibly smart at monetizing their assets. In fact, very recently I was reading this thing on LinkedIn. I was reading this Akshat Srivastava, if you've ever followed him. His wife is an Indian Economic Services officer. So he's written that he's very popular, by the way, and guides people on investment. He's invested a huge amount in Airbnbs in Goa, bought a lot of properties and put it on rent. So he's monetizing the asset instead of giving it on a rental basis. Are you aware of this Airbnb concept? So instead of giving the entire thing for a monthly basis, for a daily basis, you give it on rent. The returns will be really high, especially in tourist destination. It might be low in some months, but in other months it will be really good. So you are able to generate more money out of the same asset. The government has been able to identify this. All of you might have seen in your different areas, wherever you come from, there is land kept, the government rang and there is only one board written there: trespassers will be prosecuted. This is Government of India's land. Like in case of Delhi, you will find a lot of DDA lands lying vacant. You will also find a lot of land in the port areas which is being unused. A lot of land near railway tracks, especially railways. They have huge parcels of land at times in premium locations, and they are not doing anything with it. So what the government has realized is, let's be a baniya. Let's try to take money. Let's try to make money out of this. And then with this, all due respect to baniyas, because I'm a huge fan of them. Okay. Now, so when you see that how to extract more money, they say, let me put a building here and then put it for rent. Let me see how can I extract. But they're not selling this. They are going to rent it out to you for a number of years, say 20 years, 30 years, even 99-year lease. But they are going to rent it out to you and not sell it to you. In that case, they are going to generate income where income did not exist, monetizing your asset. And finally, you have loan repayment. Now, why is loan repayment coming here? The asset that was created here is now being repaid here. Therefore, it creates a reduction in your liability. Now, the last thing in the expenditure side, let's see the expenditure side. If you see the expenditure side, you will see you have revenue and capital. The connotation remains absolutely analogous, that if it changes the asset liability, if any kind of expenditure changes the asset liability of the government, it will come under capital account or capital receipts. If it doesn't have an impact on asset and liability, it should come under revenue side. But you can also colloquially understand it as a recurring expenditure or a non-recurring expenditure. Now let's see the biggest thing that eats away the government revenue. It is interest payment. And I'll show it to you in this year's budget. For every 100 rupees that the government is earning, 17 rupees is directly taken up by this EMI. Think of it as an EMI for all your Purana PAP that you have done. What is this? EMI is PAP. Not actually a PAP, but you can think of whenever I see my salary, like today my salary came from Government of India. The moment my salary came, I was very happy. But in the next 5 minutes, I have an auto debit option on my credit cards. The moment that it sees there is money, everyone from which I have borrowed on my credit card starts eating it away, because I have put that auto measure. So I avoid seeing messages on my first of every month. I see my salary on the 2nd of Feb, because that I know is what I really have. Because first is give and take. Take and then give to all of these people that I've borrowed from. So this is your interest payment, which is a huge chunk. And this is what is the source of this PAP? This. If you are borrowing, you have to pay for it. So these two sides are related to each other. Understood? Then the next thing is subsidies. Now when you will see subsidies, the three things that should come in your mind, and you will see that throughout the next 1 week. There are different kinds of subsidies that the government gives. And in NDA 2, the amount of subsidies have, by the way, increased by 2-3 folds. In fact, 3 folds, from somewhere around 1.5% of GDP to 4.5% of GDP. Now, what is this subsidy? There are 3 main kinds. One is called food subsidy. They are called 3 Fs, which I say screw the government. I can't use the word, but 3 Fs which screw the government. The first F is food subsidy. Why? Because the government right now under Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana gives 25 kgs absolutely free of cost to everyone, to 67% of the population. And But do you think, doesn't it cost the government that some amount of money? One is, can you mathematically define this figure to me? How is the government paying? What is the government paying? The minimum support price or the procurement price? You will understand this in agriculture. The government of India buys this food grains, basically on behalf of the government of India, the Food Corporation of India buys these food grains from farmers. And by the way, 90% of the procurement is done by only Haryana and Punjab. And that's why these were the two governments which were anti-farming laws. Now, they get money for procurement. Their food is taken by the Food Corporation of India. The government every year increases the MSP because that's a political issue. MSP increase करना, MSP नहीं करोगे तो anti farmer होगा, 45% तो उन्हीं को वोट करना है. So MSP keeps increasing, but MSP is not the only cost. Do you only procure and keep it? You have to store it, you have to ship it. So the cost of procurement and incidentals are added to it. You are going to store it in your warehouses, you are going to procure it, store it, keep it, transport it, all that procurement cost. And then what happens is you have to give it to different states based on their all the poverty figures that you have. Then you have to transfer them. Now what happens is that you are spending so much per kg and you are getting absolute zero in return. You are spending 25 kgs per household. It's 5 kgs per person for an average household of 5 members. 25 kgs per person per household you're spending. And the amount of food is around 80 million tons that you're doing. 80 million tons you are giving away for free of cost. Isn't that a subsidy? You're not getting anything, but you are paying money. So that is called as food subsidy, and it had burgeoned because of first COVID, because it was not just 25 kg, it was 50 kg. 25 here and 25 under National Food Security Act, which was paid, but that was also very less, 3 rupees, 2 rupees and 1 rupee kg. 1 rupee rice, 2 rupees wheat and 3 rupees coarse cereal. No, 1 rupee coarse cereal, 3 rupees rice and 2 rupees wheat. So, but these two schemes got merged, and under Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, 25 kg is free. But this food subsidy has exploded. Then, the second F is fertilizer subsidies. The fertilizer subsidies is because the government says that I will provide subsidies to people who use this NPK, urea, phosphorus and potassium, apart from sulfur, NPKs actually. These are 4 nutrients plus sulfur actually is a micronutrient. These are 4 nutrients which are essential for any particular production process. And depending on the soil that you have in your area, you have to use certain ratio, but that we don't do. Why? Because government of India has controlled the urea prices in the country, but the prices of phosphorus and potassium has gone through the roof because of the Russia-Ukraine war. Because most of the fertilizers are produced in that particular region, the prices have increased, the supply chain disruption has increased, the prices have increased, but the government cannot charge huge amount from the farmers. So the difference is paid, the money that you get, the money that is paid by the farmer versus the money that is actually paid to the company which is producing the fertilizer. The MRP of the fertilizer is huge, but the farmer what he is paying is less. That difference that is there is paid by the government of India, which generates the fertilizer subsidy. And then you have the fuel subsidy, which to a large extent has been tamed down when this government came in, because it had turned it to be a market determined price except for the LPG. Except for LPG, the prices of petrol and diesel are market driven. Every fortnight, the petrol pumps that you see, the oil marketing companies, there are 3 oil marketing companies, BPCL, IOC and HP, but one of them has merged now. Yeah, a couple of them have merged. So these companies basically change their prices every fortnight depending on how much is the crude oil you're getting the crude oil from the market, from the international market. So this leads to the this leads to the third kind of subsidy, which is the fuel subsidy. Now, apart from that, the government also spends, when we are talking about this, the government also has two more kinds of schemes, which is also mentioned in the handout that I'm going to give you. One is called as centrally sponsored schemes and one is called as central sector schemes. And this is one area, whichever scheme that you will read in this year's budget, you have to do a very deep analysis into it, and I can promise at least 1 or 2 questions will be there on one of these schemes. And unless you know this scheme in depth, you will not be able to answer it, because somewhere you will get it wrong. For example, if they ask about PM Shri, they will not just ask you the full form of PM Shri. They are going to ask you whether it's a central scheme or a central sector scheme. So this kind of nuances, who runs that scheme? Similarly, there is a scheme called as, we are going to talk about a number of schemes. We are going to talk about schemes in the electricity area, Udan scheme. So you need to know who is implementing this scheme, whether it's a state sponsored or it's a central sponsored. That deep dive you need to have, especially of whatever has been mentioned in the budget speech. That will give you, you might say that this is a topic that has come from government schemes document. It's not from government scheme. It is in the government scheme because it was mentioned in the budget, and therefore you need to do a research on that. So we'll talk about all of that, but let's first talk about this centrally sponsored scheme and centrally sector scheme. Now, if you read the State Center Finance Commission reports before the Panshi Commission report of 2007 or 2008, there was another commission report of 1988, which was called as Sakaria Commission report. Okay. So some of you might have seen this, but at least the Punchi Commission report, you should have a fair bit of idea. And also state center relations, there are other reports as well. For example, there's one on ethics as well. The other thing that you should read is the second ARC. The second ARC, there are 15 reports, of which 2-3 are extremely important for you for governance. One is for ethics, the ethical framework in the for paper number 4. The other is one that you should see is on finance, just the summary portion of it. Then you have a number of them which are on governance, which are direct overlap with your governance paper or paper number 2. So now, if you see the Panchi Commission report or if you see the Sakaria Commission report, both these reports outline that it basically what this commission is about, that states and center come together and talk about different stuff. And all these states have said that centrally sponsored schemes are a fraud on the constitution. Now, why they are a fraud on the constitution is because the 7th schedule of the constitution divides the subjects of constitutional jurisprudence into 3 lists. You have the union list, you have the state list, and you have the concurrent list. And that has been devised because it gives you which part of government has power to enact laws on which portions. For example, agriculture as a subject is in state list. Employment is a subject in state list. Law and order is a state subject. So if you see the state subjects, it's a huge list of state subjects which are very important. In fact, all of us have more to do with state subjects as compared to central subjects. I don't feel external affairs. Yes, I can see finance has an importance, but central government have those topics which might or might not have direct relevance in my day-to-day life, but state subjects are extremely important. And there are subjects like health, there are subjects like education which are in concurrent list. You should know things in concurrent list by heart, by the way. So what happens is, if you see a scheme like NREGA, NREGA is a scheme for what purpose? Employment. If you see the Constitution of India, employment is a matter. Both employment and agriculture are matters of state list. Let's say Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, insurance, crop insurance. It's a matter of the, again, it's a matter of state government. If you talk about national, say Ayushman Bharat, so Ayushman Bharat, Ayushman Bharat is in state because health is a state subject. So all of these are state subjects, but the scheme that has been made is by the center. So the center is getting onto the state subjects, making schemes on it, and then asking states to implement it and also pay for it in some ratio. There are two kinds of schemes. One is called as core of core and the other is called core schemes. So if it's a core of core scheme, 75% will be given by the center. Suppose 100 rupees have to be spent, 75 rupees will be given by the center, but the states will have to contribute 25% of a scheme which it did not, may would want to spend on it or might not. And if it's a core scheme, it's 60-40. So, but what you are doing is, you are getting into the jurisdiction of states, enacting a policy and forcing its hand to implement it. Therefore, robbing the states, and the best part is, most of them are now in the name of the Prime Minister. And what happens, I'm talking about the political science of it. Because only certain political figures can be put on the posters. It's only the CM, it's only the PM, it's the President of India, or some judges whose pictures can come. No one else's. Therefore, you will see that it becomes a huge election point, that everywhere you will see one person's pictures. So it becomes an electoral issue also. For example, on every petrol pump that you will go to, you will see the Prime Minister's picture, because it's a scheme that is being implemented there. Therefore, states have a problem, especially the non-center ruling states. So, this centrally sponsored schemes, the government of India is spending money, but in some ratio, but there are central sector schemes. Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, it's a scheme in the financial sector. It's a central sector scheme because finance is a central subject. It's not a state subject or a concurrent subject. So if the center is paying money, 100% money on that scheme, it becomes a central sector scheme. No share of the state. And with the state scheme, the states will pay it. It will not come in this budget. Which budget will it come to? The state budget. It will become a part of the state budget. Then, and by the way, when you prepare, whenever hopefully you will go for the interviews, whenever you prepare for the interviews, also make sure that you are aware of your state budgets as well. Because at times you might get members on the board which are IAS officers of the same state that you're coming from. And they might grill you on your state as well. The economy of your state, just like you have the union budget, you have the state, the state budget as well as the state survey as well. So you should be aware of your own state's revenues as too. Then you have establishment expenditure, salaries and pension. Now, I'd like to turn some of them as committed expenditures. Can you reduce salaries and pension? They have been committed. Can you reduce interest payment? There is something committed. So, a lot of expenditures which the government is going to do, I'll show you in the last part. A lot of expenditure that the government is going to do is already committed. I'll show you this side is 48 trillion rupees. And how much would be this side? If this is 48 trillion, how much should be this side? 48 trillion. Basic accountancy, money received should be equal to money that you have spent. So both these sides will show it as 42 trillion. But what I will show you is, out of that 48 trillion, a lot of money is already fixed. The hands of the government is already tied because it has to spend on pension, it has to spend on army expenditure, this defense expenditure as well. There's something called defense expenditure, transfers to states which is already given. It cannot get rid of that because the Finance Commission talks about that. The interest payments that you have to do. All these committed expenditures are there, and whatever is left, then you have to win elections. You have to have schemes like PM Kisan, 6,000 rupees. You have to give some kinds of goodies, some kind of freebies to your population as well. So that you need to do. And after that, whatever money is left, you think, okay, let's build some hospitals, some highways, something productive out of it. But this is what has changed in the last 3-4 years. After the committed expenditure, the government is saying let me spend the maximum amount left on capital expenditure. So, and I need to trim my revenue expenditure. So the focus of the NDA government has been in the last 10 years. Increase, committed you can't do anything. Committed is committed. Whatever is left, let's try to maximize capital expenditure, because this will give you a return 10 years from now. There is something called as multiplier effect. For every 1 rupee spent on capital expenditure, the multiplier effect on GDP is going to be 2 times, 3 times. But for every 1 rupee that you are spending on freebies, on revenue expenditure, on subsidies, the return is going to be 0.5. So it makes sense, economic sense, to spend more on capital expenditure and less on revenue expenditure. Understood? This is what the philosophy has been. So these are two sides, these are the sides. Then you have, there's another thing, grants to states for capital creation. Now at time, center gives under Article 275, there's a term called grants in aid. The center gives money to the states, but that money is only given to make certain capital assets. You can't spend it on anything. You can only make hospital out of it, bridges out of it, or you can spend it on, say, construction of colleges. So you have to, the state have to show that there is some capital expenditure that has been done out of the money that has been given by the center. That's a separate entity that comes in, and it is important because there's a term in the budget called as effective revenue deficit, which takes account of this. We'll talk about that. So take a note of this particular item especially. And finally, you have central's expenditure. You have capital expenditure. The central is expenditure on different things, assets and liabilities. It can be general social economic services, and then loans and advances. Yes. No, central, which sector specific? No. If it's a grant, so there are different sectors that can be done under the 15th Finance Commission. You would have to see that if the nature of the grant is capital in nature. For example, this 15th Finance Commission said that you have to remodel the judicial infrastructure. That's a grant given for capital creation. So you need to identify the nature of the grant. Is the grant given to a particular state capital in nature, or is it a revenue deficit grant? When you will read Finance Commission, you will read that the center, remember I told you that center gives 41 rupees out of that piggy bank to the states. But even after giving that 41 rupees, certain states are still begging. They are begging with a begging bowl. Sir, hum kya kare? Hamare paas isse bhi paisa nahi ho raha. Then the Finance Commission says, okay, these are two poor states. Even after devolution of that money, the Finance Commission says, post devolution, give them the revenue deficit grant. So that is grant given by the Finance Commission on the behest of the Finance Commission. The center has to give to particular garib states, but that is not capital expenditure. But at times the Finance Commission will also say, give these particular states some money because their infrastructure is poor, because their health structure is poor, because the judicial infrastructure in that state is poor. That is creating capital assets. So therefore, that will come under grants to states for capital creation. But as a nation as a whole, do you think that is a revenue? That's a revenue expenditure. It's a capital expenditure for the nation. It might be a revenue expenditure for the center, from the financial perspectives of the budget. But for the nation as a whole, it's not a revenue expenditure. And then you have capital expenditures. Is the anatomy clear? No, there is a discretionary grant under Article 282. That is different. That is even after all of this. Same, Yogi ji comes to Modi ji. अब तो हमने मंदिर भी बना दिया. थोड़ा और दे दो. In that case, the center has the power under Article 282 to give a discretionary grant to a particular state. That's why it's called discretionary grant. And that is where politics also plays a major role. You will give more discretionary grants to your own bhai bandhus as compared to your opposition. Yes. Out of budget liability. Yeah. Yes. That is called as all of this that you see. Very interesting question. I was in my interview panel today was MF Faruqi. He is a 1979 batch IAS from the Tamil Nadu cadre who also became the telecom secretary in 2013, just after that scam that came up. He was taking interviews with me. So I asked him the same question. We were having discussion on budget today. So I asked him the same question. Sir, ये budget के figure क्या है? कहते, what do you think these are real figures? हम बनाते हैं figures. हमारा जो मन करता है. अब मन कर रहा है कि थोड़ा सरकार करिए कि थोड़ा कम डेफिसिट करना है, तो हम नंबर हमें बनाना आता है कि कम एक्सपेंडिचर कैसे करना और ज्यादा कैसे करना. It's the same thing. When we do rankings, there are something called India Today rankings of colleges, NIRF ranking, NAC ranking. I've been part of that. From 25 position, the previous college that I used to teach, I made its rank to be 11 without any on-ground difference. Because I knew how to manipulate data. I know the weightages that are going in each particular number and I know how to fudge that. So what you see in real life, what you see in this, the reality is absolutely different. And if you really want to know the reality, you should read books by Subhash Chandra. Subhash Agarwal. What is his name? The finance secretary? Subhash Garg. He writes a lot on, follow his articles on LinkedIn, and instead of being on these apps like your Instagram, have LinkedIn accounts and follow good economists if you really want to do some time pass. You will get a lot of articles that are there. In fact, when I'll teach you these articles tomorrow, when I'll teach you the crux of the budget, a lot of this will be articles that have been posted by economists. So that those people are giving you good insights. Subhash Garg was the finance secretary of Government of India, and he had a huge issue with Nirmala Sitharaman, because of which he resigned also. And now, because of that problem, he now reveals a lot of things which ordinary people don't know. The behind the numbers, the fudging that happens, how the numbers get created, it's done. So what the question was, that before 2021's budget, the fiscal deficit used to be a smaller number than it was actually done. What used to happen was that the Government of India used to, instead of borrowing itself, it used to force one of its organizations like Food Corporation of India to borrow on behalf of Government of India, or to spend money on behalf of Government of India. LIC to spend on behalf of Government of India, because it will not be shown in the books of Government of India, it will be shown on the books of these private entities, and the Government of India will only have to show the interest payment and not the full amount. They will pay interest to them, but the actual liability is lying on the balance sheets of these PSUs. This was called as out of balance sheet numbers. So out of balance sheet deficits. But this was corrected in the year 2021. And why it was corrected? सरकार को पता चल गया कि वैसी कोविड से वाट लग रही है. Fiscal deficit was already going to be 7.5%. 2% बढ़ भी जाएगा तो क्या दिक्कत? They said this is the time to come out with truth. ठीक है, सारे पाप बता दो एक साथ ही कि भाई हमने ये भी बोरो करा हुआ था. That's why in that year you see the fiscal deficit to go to 9.6%, because the government realized this is the best time. दुनिया माफ कर देगी इस टाइम पे. ठीक है, जब आपके बड़े झूठ पड़े पकड़े जा रहे, जब आपके बहुत सारी चीजें बढ़ रही है, तो छोटे छोटे झूठ भी बता ही दो ना उसी टाइम पे. ये चीजें, that is that we'll see that in the budget numbers. So out of budget expenditures now are incorporated. It's no more a practice, right? Now, final thing, let's wrap this up. Let's see certain deficits. Now, if you see the fiscal deficit, now the fiscal deficit, as I told you, is the borrowings of Government of India. It is also called debt making capital receipt. It is also called as total revenue minus revenue receipt minus debt making capital receipts, because what is left is only debt making capital receipts. This is called as the fiscal deficit. And if you see the expansion and if you see the path, this is from 2001. There is an Excel sheet. I have not used the government thing. I have used an Excel sheet behind this, and I have plotted this for you. If you see, there was an act that you will read in your preparation called as FRBM Act, which was passed in 2003 and which said that the government should have a mandate to have a fiscal deficit of 3% and a revenue deficit of 0%. And we were able to achieve that goal in the year 2007-2008. But after that, there was a crisis in the world which is called as global financial crisis, because of which the government had to give huge amount of subsidies of fiscal stimulus, which is also called as Mukherjee stimulus, because Pranab Mukherjee used to be the finance minister at that time. So the government gave a huge stimulus, because of which, and how do you give stimulus? You increase your expenditures and you reduce your taxes. When you increase your expenditures, you reduce your income, your borrowings will rise. That is exactly what happened. GFC, global financial crisis. Then you had a path of consolidation that you had. And after that, you have an increase of, because of COVID, and this 9.2 is also because of that out of budget liabilities. And then you have now this path of fiscal consolidation. You have a revised estimate of 5.8%. The government had, remember I told you budget estimate and revised estimate. The government last year said that it will have a budget estimate of 5.9% of GDP as fiscal deficit. So when I say what is this number? We are borrowing 5.9% of our GDP, what are the government is borrowing. But after this year, in the 10 months, we have realized that we have been able to spend, get a lot of money, especially because of tax money. So therefore, the government is saying that the borrowing, we will be able to control to 5.8, and next year we will further reduce it to 5.1. But what you should definitely note, because this will be relevant for you when you are writing your answers in mains, is that the government has a glide path to 4.5% fiscal deficit by 2025-26. That is the aim right now that we have. Then we will think about further deficits. But right now the aim is 4.5% fiscal deficit by 2025-26. This is the fiscal glide path. Understood the glide? Just like a glider lands, it's a glide path that the government has taken up. Then you have revenue deficit. If you see the revenue deficit, it also mimics the same graph of fiscal deficit, but the definition of revenue deficit is different. Revenue deficit is revenue expenditures minus revenue receipts. Basically, what is your recurring income and what is your recurring expenditure? Ideally, this should be equal to 0. And that is what our goal is. But you can see, because of FRBM, we tried to contract it. Then under GFC, it increased. And now under COVID also increased. Now we are trying to reduce it to further 2% in the budget year 2024-25. Now, there is another thing which will not be given in books. But as an economist, I'm telling you, there is a ratio that you should also check. Okay, you will not find it in any book. Of the borrowings that you are doing, suppose I borrow 100 rupees. How much did I spend from that borrowing on ice creams and colas and pizzas, and how much did I spend on books? Can you get that analogy? I am borrowing money. How much did I waste on revenue expenditure and how much did I do capital expenditure? If I get 1 lakh rupees, I can go to an iPhone store and immediately buy an iPhone. Or I can think of ways how can I make this 1 lakh rupee into 2 lakh rupees by investing it somewhere. That is the difference. So therefore, the ratio of revenue deficit to fiscal deficit tells you the quality of your borrowing. Your borrowing is not a problem. You can borrow, but to what end are you borrowing is important. Understood this concept? That why are you borrowing? Finally, just a second, sir. I need to take this. Dushar, मैं अभी कॉल करता हूँ. This ratio, yes, this ratio should be less. Give me 1 second, folks. Second. Yes. So this ratio should be less. Dushar, good evening. I'll call you in 10 minutes. So this ratio should ideally be less, and revenue deficit ideally should be 0, which was the original aim of the FRBM Act. You will understand this FRBM Act. And when I typically teach, when I teach the GS in general, when I teach the GS paper, but I mean, when I teach Indian economy to university students, I don't teach them this thing first. I teach them the history of Indian economy from 1950 till 2022. You should first get the trailer of the economy. And that is where the problem lies in all the books. They keep telling you different aspects of economy while not giving you the entire picture. You will be able to get the entire picture only after a couple of years of prep. And that is what the problem in all these books is. But the problem with Uma Kapila kind of books is it doesn't deal directly with, it doesn't hit the head of the nail directly, because it doesn't address the UPSC kind of questions. It gives you a good overview, but it falls short when it comes to prelims kind of questions. So you need to have a mixture of these two approaches. Now, then you have primary deficit. This is another number that you should be aware of. Let's talk about this. Now remember, what was fiscal deficit? It was your PAP, पुराने PAP, and interest payment is पुराने PAP पे जो interest अभी दे रहे हो. But there is a number called as primary deficit. Whatever you have borrowed, some amount you are paying. Suppose I borrow 100 rupees today, but out of this 100 rupees, some amount I am paying the interest that on the loans that I had taken previously. Can you understand? Suppose I take from someone, I take 100 rupees, I have to give him 10 rupees at rate of interest. 10 rupees as interest. Next year, I take 200 rupees from someone else, but from that 200 rupees, I have to pay 10 rupees to him. I'm playing a Ponzi game of sorts. Understand Ponzi game? You are taking from someone and then giving to someone. So if you reduce from the borrowings, the interest payments, that was your Purane PAP, what will you get? The borrowings that you have done for this financial year. Understood? I borrowed 100 rupees. From that 100 rupees, 20 rupees was previous year's interest payments. So 80 rupees that I am borrowing is for this financial year, this year's borrowing, which is your current PAP. जो आप PAP करने जा रहे हो, वो वाले PAP. पुराने PAP के interest हटा दो, तो नए PAP आ गए आपके. This is your, and that's why we use the term primary, because this is the borrowings that you have, fresh borrowings that you are going to create. That's why it's called fresh borrowings of current financial year. Understood? And the figures will be very similar, because whatever the fiscal deficit is, some amplitude of that will be your revenue deficit and primary deficit as well. More example kaise? Like say what I have done is that this year I have taken a car loan, okay, and I have to pay some interest on that. Now next year what I do is I take a huge personal loan and I give some amount of the EMI of my car loan from that personal loan. So whatever is left is basically my that year's loan. So I am borrowing continuously, but some part of my borrowings is to repay the previous interest rates. If I reduce that, whatever is left is my fresh borrowings, the fresh amount of borrowing that I'm going to do. That is why it's called primary deficit. And lastly, there's something called as effective revenue deficit. This effective revenue deficit is basically revenue deficit minus grants to states. Remember, I told you that there is something called grants to states for capital creation. Revenue deficit was revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. But as a nation, some amount of that expenditure which the states, for which the money is given to states, is done for capital assets. So if we reduce that, we get effective revenue deficit. It was introduced by Pranab Mukherjee in 2010, but it's now just a convention. There's no use of this term. And this is the final part that I wanted to show you. This is how the numbers stack up for this year's budget. This is your tax revenue is 26 trillion. Now understand the concept of 1 trillion. 1 trillion is 10 to the power of 12 zeros. If you divide it by 80, you will get it in terms of dollars as well. So around 12.5, 12.6 billion dollars is nothing but equivalent to 1 trillion rupees. So this math you should be able to figure out. Converting anything into, first of all, lakh crore should be immediately converted into trillion, because it is very innocuous when you say something called 1 lakh crore. Because when you say 1 lakh crore, you have to first write 1 lakh and then add CR to it. Instead, just write 1 trillion. So easy. So right now, the tax amount is 26 trillion. Now, before we end the class, I want you to write how the government makes its budget. The first thing that the government actually sees is, and I'll show it to you in this document. This figure, see this. The first thing that the government does is that the government tries to see what is my GDP. When I say GDP, my nominal GDP, price into quantity produced in a country. So if you see price into quantity produced in our country, this is what GDP is. The amount of goods and the prices of amounts of goods and services sold in an economy. This is the size of the economy in 2023-24, which is 296 lakh crore. I can call it, if you read this number, this is 2 crore 96 lakhs. 2 crore 96 lakh crore. Again, and such an innocuous number to say कि क्या बन रहा है ये number, इतने zeros लग जाएंगे इसमें. I can say this as 296 lakh crores. Can I say this? 296 lakh crores. What can I also say this as? 296 trillion or 300. So simple. And the moment that I have to divide it by 80, I can divide by 80 and say that it's 3.7 trillion. So this is how you calculate these numbers more quickly. You should be efficient enough to calculate this, because you will get confused over the next 1 week. You will get confused over numbers that are given in your daily newspaper. Whether you read Hindu or Indian Express, all of them will start quoting lakh crores. Some of them will convert it into millions rupees. They will be very smart people. That they said they'll quote it in millions. Then someone will quote it in lakh crores, someone will call it in trillions. But don't get confused in all of this. The best thing to do is convert it into trillions. So our economy is 296 trillion rupees. What we try to estimate is how much will be the economy in 2024-25. The difference between these two numbers will be the GDP growth rate. The nominal GDP growth rate, price into quantity growth rate. And the country has assumed, what we have assumed is that we will grow by 10.5% on nominal terms, including inflation. When you say nominal growth rate, you mean including inflation. So here you are saying, assuming a 10.5% growth rate, you are going, if you increase this by 10.5%, this number will be 327 trillion rupees. Now you know what will be the size of GDP. Understood? This is the first assumption that you do while by making budget. And this again you will not find in budget, in any of the topics of budget, none of the books. The first thing that you do is, as an economist, you try, and this is what Nirmala Sitharaman wants to do. And this exercise is done in August itself. In August last year, she asked all the technical people, by how much can we grow next year? They say 10.5%. That means from this number, you can grow to this number. Once you know that this much will be your GDP, the taxes that you are going to get will be some percentage of this GDP. That concept is called as tax buoyancy. If my income increases by 10%, don't you think my tax liability will also increase? My taxes will increase. This concept is called as tax buoyancy. Percentage change in taxes upon percentage change in GDP. Concept called tax buoyancy. Our tax buoyancy is 1.2. That means if my income is changing by, if my GDP is changing by 1%, my taxes are changing by 1.2% or 20% more than my income, the income increase. So if I am able to get from this number to this number, I can also say that my tax revenue will increase by 12 point or 1.2 times of this number. So I can then estimate how much will be my tax revenue, and this is how this number is coming. Based on my projection of GDP, I am able to determine I will get 26 trillion rupees from here. And based on my borrowings, remember I told you that borrowings we have to fix. One thing, first assumption is GDP. Second is what amount of money am I going to get. Third is how much I am going to borrow. This is borrowing, debt making. Fiscal deficit, how much can I borrow? 17 trillion. Then how much can I get from other sources? The total of this will give you 48 trillion rupees that you can spend. This is the income side of the union budget. Understood? And this is this year's, by the way. And then you have the expenditure side. The expenditure side is the committed expenditure I told you. Salary, pension, interest payments. You can't do anything about it. Non-committed, subsidies, CSS and CSS, centrally sponsored scheme, center sector schemes, transfers to states. This is 37 trillion this time. And whatever, and the government first said that I am going to spend 11 trillion here, whatever is left I will spend here. But a lot of this is fixed, so they would have to reduce this amount. एक जगह से नहीं तो दूसरी जगह से तो पकड़ना पड़ेगा, because income has to be equal to expenditure. 48 trillion rupees there should be equal to 48 trillion rupees here. And this is how this is made finally. Understood this? That's about it, folks. This is me. And there's one more slide. I think. You can find my videos on the Pink Professor, the YouTube channel. And let me see if this opens up. This is a 3D rendering. This is my favorite slide actually. Yeah. So thank you very much, folks. I will see you. Hope to see you tomorrow. If you're up for it. How many of you are going to come? Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to do this year's budget, but I'll let you know, because I might also have an interview scheduled. I'll let you know the timings. It might be 6 or 6:30, just in case if I'm busy with interviews, because today I had to rush from the interviews for this session. So I'll let you know the exact time. It might be, instead of 5, it might be 5:30 or 6, just in case I'm stuck there. And what we will discuss is, we will discuss this year's budget, because we have not touched this year's budget, remember. We have only talked about problems that Indian economy was facing, the anatomy of the budget, and the numbers of the budget. But now we need to see what is there in this year's budget, and which I'll tell you all the schemes that you should focus on for this year's prelims. And then when the paper comes, especially who are giving this year paper, you can underline that I told you that this scheme, one of these schemes will come, and that scheme has come. All right, and mains definitely you will get. Apart from that, I will also send you one document, which is that 2-chapter document of the review of the Indian economy, which is more relevant for prelims, because once the economic survey comes, then you would have to do the economic survey for your mains. All right. Thank you very much, folks. I'll see you tomorrow.